Montana Territory. 1878. The wind cut low across the grassy flatlands as the sun dropped behind the Bitterroot Range, casting orange light on the broken wagon half submerged in the mud. Retta Elwood gripped the rifle tighter, her boots sinking deeper into the wet earth, her breath sharp in her chest. Behind her, her son and daughter crouched in the broken wagon bed. Willis, 8 years old, and Wren, just 5. Neither had spoken since the wheel snapped and their horse bolted at the crack of gunfire. She had not seen who fired the shot, only heard it too close, too fast. Her husband had died 3 years back in a mining collapse near Helena, and she had not trusted a man since. Especially not one with a gun. So when she heard the crunch of hoofbeats through the tall grass and the silhouette of a rider appeared along the ridgeline, her finger tightened near the trigger. "Even in," the cowboy called, keeping his hands visible near the reins. "You all right down there?" His voice was level, not too loud. Calm, like he knew fear could make a woman shoot first. He stopped 20 paces back. His horse, a dusty bay, stood still beneath him. "I do not need help," Retta said, not lowering the rifle. The cowboy's eyes flicked to the children, then back to her. "Wagon sunk, sun's near down, you got nowhere to go and 2 little ones to look after." Retta hesitated. Her arms burned from holding the gun so long. Wren whimpered softly behind her. "What do you want?" she asked. "Just to help." He dismounted slow, pulling off his hat. "Name's Nolan Nash. I am headed west to Deer Lodge. Saw the mess, figured I'd check if someone needed a hand." He was young, maybe 30, with a sharp jaw and dark blonde hair, sun bleached at the ends. His clothes were worn but clean. His voice carried no arrogance, only steady kindness. Retta lowered the rifle a few inches. "We are not headed anywhere anymore. Wheel broke. Horse ran off." He nodded, stepping closer. "I can fix the wheel come morning. For now, I got coffee and a dry blanket if the little ones are cold." Willis peeked his head over the wagon ledge. "Mama, I am cold." Retta's shoulders sagged. She nodded once. By the time the sky went black, they sat around a fire Nolan built from driftwood and dry grass. The coffee boiled in a dented pot. Willis and Wren curled together under one of Nolan's thick saddle blankets, snoring soft beside the fire. Retta sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. She watched Nolan in the firelight. He did not talk much, just checked the kid's blanket, then leaned back against a tree with his hat over his knee. "You could have robbed us," she said quietly. "Could have," he agreed. "You could have lied. Could have done that too." She studied him. "Why did you help?" He looked at her for a long moment, the flicker of the fire dancing in his eyes. "Because you looked tired, like someone who carries too much alone." Retta dropped her gaze. The wind picked up, rustling the grass. She had not cried in years, not really, but something about the way he said it so simple, like he saw her, made her chest ache. "You deserve better than this," she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "Better than dragging a broken woman and her 2 kids out of the mud." He did not hesitate. "I deserve you." She looked up fast, startled. He was still watching her, calm and sure. "You do not even know me." "I know what I see," Nolan said. "You kept those children safe through whatever hell led you here. You stood your ground with a gun in your hand and no fear in your eyes. That is all I need to know." Retta shook her head. "I am not soft. I do not have anything left to give." "You got fire left in you," he said. "And I do not need soft. I need real." She stared at him, too stunned to speak. Nolan stood and tossed another log onto the fire. "You rest now. I will keep watch." He walked a few paces out, checked the tree line, then sat on a fallen log with his rifle across his knees. He did not look back at her, but she watched him until her eyes closed. That night, Retta slept without waking for the first time in nearly 2 years. Come morning, Nolan was already at the wagon, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. Willis brought him a tin of water. Wren sat beside Retta plaiting grass. The wheel was almost rebuilt by midday. "Where are you headed?" Retta asked, watching Nolan hammer. "Got a job waiting at a cattle outfit west of Deer Lodge. Foreman is a cousin of mine. Said there is room for another set of hands if I find someone reliable." She hesitated. "You offering that to me?" Nolan straightened, wiped his hands. "I am offering it to all three of you." Retta looked down at her children. Willis was trying to copy Nolan's hammering with a stick. Wren had braided flowers into Retta's sleeve. "I will think about it," she said. That night they camped again, not far from the river. The children laughed for the first time in weeks. Nolan had caught a rabbit and cooked it slow over the fire. As the stars came out, Retta stood beside him, brushing her hands off on her skirt. "You meant what you said?" she asked. "About what?" "That you deserve me." He looked at her, quiet a long time. Then he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I do not say things I do not mean." She looked at him, really looked this time, and saw not just kindness but steadiness, a place to rest, a place to begin again. "I do not know how to be with someone anymore," she admitted, her voice small. He smiled, soft this time. "We will learn together." That night, she let herself sit close to him by the fire, their shoulders touching. And in the hush of the Montana night, something new began, not loud, not rushed, just real. The trail westward cut through low hills and wind swept pasture. The wagon creaking beneath its patched wheel as the horses, two sturdy bays bartered from a trading post outside Phillipsburg, plodded along with steady resolve. Retta held the reins with practiced hands, her children drowsing in the back, lulled by the rhythm of movement and the hush between trees. The mountains rose distant and blue to the west. Nolan rode a few strides ahead on his bay, his rifle lashed behind the saddle, his eyes shifting often to the tree line. They'd been traveling together for 6 days. "When we stop," Retta said, voice quiet but sure, "I want to cook tonight." "You've done it every evening." Nolan reined in, letting his horse fall alongside the wagon. "Didn't want to presume," he said, glancing at her. "I figured you'd speak when you were ready." "I'm ready," she said, and didn't look away. They made camp just before dusk, near a bend in the Blackfoot River. The children gathered flat stones and stacked them near the fire pit, their laughter echoing lightly across the water. Retta knelt in the grass, sleeves rolled, apron tied, and began slicing turnips and wild onions Nolan had traded for earlier that morning. "You always cook in silence?" Nolan asked as he hobbled the horses nearby. "I think better when I'm busy." He nodded and sat on a nearby stump. "You think a lot, then?" She stirred the pot with the wooden spoon she'd carved herself years ago. "I used to talk too much. It didn't help anything. You ever miss it, speaking your mind?" "Sometimes." She scraped the bottom of the pot, eyes fixed on the softening vegetables. "But silence doesn't lie, not like words can." Nolan leaned back, arms resting on his knees. "I reckon that's true. But sometimes silence keeps things buried that need air." She gave him a sideways look. "You mean me?" He didn't answer right away. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing up the trunks of the pines. "I mean anyone who's had to carry weight alone for too long." Retta set the spoon down and stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I'll fetch water." She walked to the riverbank, the empty pail swinging at her side. The chill from the current reached up through her boots as she crouched, dipping the pail below the surface. She stayed there longer than she needed to, listening to the hush of the water and the distant call of a loon. When she returned, the stew was bubbling low and Willis had started tracing letters in the dirt with a stick. Nolan was showing Wren how to thread pine needles into a loop. "They'll learn from you," she said quietly, setting the pail down. He didn't look up. They've already learned from you. Later, after the children had eaten and curled up beneath their blanket, Retta stood beside the fire, rubbing the ache from her shoulders. Nolan passed her the last of the coffee, his hand brushing hers. I had a sister, he said, watching the stars. Back in Kansas. She died of fever when I was 16. After that, I started drifting. Couldn't stay long in any one place. Felt wrong somehow. Retta looked at him. You running from her memory? No, just didn't know where to put it, she nodded. I know that feeling. You ever wonder what you'd be if things were different? No, she said. I wonder who I'd be. And, I don't know, but I don't think she'd be stronger than me. He smiled then, not wide, just enough that the lines in his face softened. I'm glad you're this you, he said. She turned back toward the fire, the warmth brushing her face. I still don't know what to make of you, she murmured. You don't have to, not all at once. She hesitated. You said before that you don't say things you don't mean. That's right. If I asked why you're still here after this many days, what would your answer be? He stepped closer, not touching her, just near enough that she could feel the heat of him. I'm here because I want to be. Because the thought of riding on without you doesn't sit right, she swallowed, throat tight. You don't even know where I'm headed. I do now. He looked at her steady. Wherever you're going, that's where I want to be. She didn't reply. But when she sat by the fire again, she left space beside her. Nolan filled it without a word, and in the hush that followed, something new settled between them, not promise, not yet, but the beginning of one. The grass bent low under frost come morning, brittle and silver. Retta paused at the edge of camp with an armload of kindling, watching the breath curl from her mouth. Nolan stood knee-deep in the river, sleeves rolled, rinsing out his shirt in the current. He didn't glance over, but he knew she was there. That kind of awareness had settled between them, unspoken but sure. Water's colder than it looks, he said, wringing the cloth with practiced hands. I won't be joining you, Retta answered. I've done my share of freezing baths. Nolan laughed low. I figured. She carried the wood back to the fire pit and crouched to stack it. The children were still curled in their blanket, Wren's hand tucked into Willis's shirt like she was holding on to a dream. When Nolan joined her, shirt damp and hanging loose, she passed him the flint. You ever live in a town? She asked, brushing ash from her skirt. For a spell. Cimarron, back in New Mexico territory. Worked a livery stable with an old army friend. Did you like it? He struck the flint once, twice, until the tinder caught. Didn't hate it, but too many folk talking all at once. I like the quiet better, Retta nodded. I thought I wanted town life once. A porch, clean linens. Someone tipping his hat at me every morning like clockwork. Did you have that for a while? Before the mind took him. There was no need to say his name. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just honest. Nolan fed a twig into the flame. You ever think about what comes next? I can't afford to. If you could, she looked toward the river where the slow light of dawn was reaching the far bank. I'd want stillness, she said. Not idleness, just a place where no one's always leaving. He nodded, quiet for a long time. Then, there's a cabin on the cattle grounds, small, needs work. The foreman said it's mine if I stay on past the season. Retta turned to him slow. You planning to, if I had reason. Their eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look away. Later that day they reached the edge of the basin that folded into Deer Lodge Valley, the sky wide and clean overhead. The wagon creaked down the incline, and the cattle outfit stretched below fencing. A barn, 3 buildings, all weathered gray and leaning into the wind. A wiry man with a limp met them at the corral. Nolan greeted him with the kind of handshake that came from shared years, not just blood. Retta stayed back with the children, one hand resting lightly on Wren's shoulder. Place looks worn. she said under her breath. Willis squinted at the windmill. Is that broken? Maybe, she said, but it's still standing. Nolan returned and nodded toward the low cabin nearest the creek. It's empty, needs mending, but the roof holds. You can see the mountains clear from the back door. Retta studied the outline of it, the way it leaned slightly to one side like it had been waiting too long for someone to come home. I won't put you in a corner, she said. I won't owe anyone. You won't owe me, Nolan said. But I wouldn't mind being needed. She let the words settle. Then, Willis can help patch the roof, he grinned. That's so, he's stubborn. Got it from me. Well, Nolan said, I've got tools and time. That evening, she stood in the doorway of the cabin while the children explored inside. The floor creaked, the chimney was cracked, and the window panes rattled in the breeze. But there was a stove, and space enough for 4. And a man outside chopping wood like he meant to stay. She stepped out and crossed the grass, stopping just short of him. You deserve better, she said. Than this crooked cabin, than a woman who's tired and sharp around the edges. He set the axe down. I deserve you. She took a breath, the air cool and clean in her lungs. Then I hope you like stubborn. I already do. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. Inside, the children laughed over something small. A knot in the wood, maybe, or a bird nesting in the rafters. Retta didn't move for a long while, just stood with Nolan, the sun settling behind the hills and the promise of something whole finally beginning. By early May, the river thawed and the grass came green again, creeping up through the hardened soil like something brave and new. Retta stood barefoot in the doorway of the cabin, sleeves rolled, her hands damp with soap and water. A washtub sat beside her, shirts and skirts soaking in the sun. Inside, Wren hummed tunelessly as she traced chalk lines across the cabin's floorboards. Willis sat on a stool, frowning over a hand-carved puzzle Nolan had whittled from scrap pine. The boy hadn't spoken much that morning, but Retta knew better than to press. He was like her that way, things turned over quiet in his head before they ever made their way out. Nolan's boots sounded on the porch. He carried a coil of hemp rope and a pail of nails, his shirt collar damp where sweat had crept through. His knuckles were scraped from repairing the barn door. Fence posts are holding, he said, setting the bucket down. But the southern line won't last past midsummer unless we brace it. We've got time, Retta replied. She wrung out a blouse, arms strong from years of doing things alone. But not much. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You always this steady when things lean toward breaking, she glanced up. What would worrying fix? Nothing, he said. But it says something about a person, what they do when something's giving way. She rinsed her hands in the basin, flicking water from her fingers. You ever break something you couldn't fix? He didn't answer right away. Then, once, a promise I made to my father I left before I should have. He died thinking I wasn't coming back. Retta stilled. You were young. That doesn't make it sit easier, she nodded. I used to believe everything could be mended with enough will, but some things stay cracked. They do, he said. But cracked things still hold if you patch them right. That night the wind came down off the hills hard and sudden. Willis couldn't sleep. He sat up stiff in his cot, eyes locked on the window. Storm? He asked. Retta knelt beside him. Just whined. Nothing more. He leaned into her shoulder without speaking, his cheek warm against her arm. She stayed until his breathing steadied. Nolan stood near the hearth, feeding kindling into the stove. He hadn't spoken since sundown, but when she turned to him, his eyes met hers. Willis is slow to trust, she said. So am I. She crossed the room and took a seat on the bench beside the fire. Her fingers tapped once against her knee. What would you have done, she asked, if we hadn't come with you? If I'd said no back at the river, I'd have gone on alone, he said. But I would have carried the thought of you every step. Her voice dropped. I was scared. I know, I'm still scared. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her, just looked at her like he'd wait as long as it took. I want to say yes, she said, gaze fixed on the flame. To this. Then say it, she shook her head. I don't know how to be sure. You don't have to be sure yet, just willing. She turned toward him then, slow and deliberate. I am. Something eased in his face, not relief, not triumph, just quiet certainty. He stood, and instead of breaking the stillness with words, he knelt beside her and pressed his forehead to hers. No kiss. Not yet. Just breathe shared between two people who'd spent too long apart from something honest. Outside, the wind settled. Inside, the fire burned steady, and for the first time since they'd come west, Retta let herself believe in permanence. Not the kind promised by preachers or papers, but the kind built by hand with fence posts and patched roofs, with children's laughter and late-night silences. The kind that held because both people stayed to hold it. By mid-June, the cabin walls no longer echoed. Nalan had paneled the inside with pine planks, trimmed from deadfall near the creek. Retta had stitched muslin curtains for the windows, not for show, but to keep the drafts at bay when evening settled. The space had filled not with clutter but with presence. A shawl draped over a chair, boots lined by the door, the shape of a life shared, not simply endured. Wren had taken to following Nalan when he worked the paddocks, her boots barely lifting past the tops of the grass. She didn't speak much, just watched and mimicked, her small hands copying the way he coiled a rope or checked a bridle. Willas preferred the quiet of the garden bed they'd carved from the earth behind the cabin, where the first shoots of beans and carrots had begun to show. Retta stood in the garden one afternoon, hands in the soil, nails packed with dirt. The sun pressed warm against her back. The children were out by the stream with Nalan, collecting flat stones for the path he planned to lay between the cabin and the well. She paused, listening. Laughter, two children and a man who'd once called himself a drifter. She hadn't known that sound could carry weight, that it could settle deep in her chest and shake something loose. She stood and brushed her palms against her skirt. When they returned, she was on the porch, knees drawn to her chest, eyes on the horizon. Nalan climbed the steps last, a bundle of stones slung over one shoulder. His shirt was streaked with dust and water. You look like a woman with something on her mind, he said. I've been thinking about the land, she said. About what it means to belong to it. He set the stones down gently. And I think I've stopped trying to outrun things. I think I want to stay. He sat beside her, his thigh warm against hers. You already have, he said. She turned to him. Not just here with you. Nalan didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a narrow silver band dulled at the edges. Not new, not bought. Worn through time. It was my mother's, he said. She wore it until the day she passed. I've carried it ever since, waiting for a woman who lived like she did, plain-spoken, steady, fierce when it mattered. Retta stared at the ring, then at him. You're sure? He smiled, not wide, not for show. Just a quiet beam of light in his face. I've never been more. She took the ring in her palm, feeling the weight of it. Then she slipped it on her finger, where it fit like it had been waiting. That night they laid the children down early. Willas mumbled something about the stars, and Wren was already asleep, her hand curled beneath her chin. Retta stepped outside and found Nalan behind the cabin, oiling the hinges on the shed door. She moved to his side, took the rag from his fingers and set it down. The moonlight made him look younger, but his eyes held the same stillness she'd come to trust. I used to think I'd never say vows again, she said. But I do. I do want this, you, a life that's built, not survived. He took her hands in his. We'll make it honest, in front of a preacher. But tonight, I'm yours just the same. She leaned into him, and he kissed her softly at first, then deeper, like all the days between that first fire and now had led here. Her fingers curled into his shirt and his arms wrapped firm around her back, holding her like he'd never let go. They married the next week in a clearing behind the pasture, with wildflowers blooming at their feet and the sun high and hot overhead. The preacher from town spoke plain, and the children stood close, their eyes wide and solemn. Nalan said his vow with steady hands and a voice that didn't falter. Retta spoke hers with a slight tremble, not from fear, but from the fullness of it. When it was done, Nalan kissed her slow, his palm warm against her cheek, and the children whooped loud enough to scare the birds from the trees. That fall, the harvest was small but enough. The garden gave, and so did the land. Nalan built a smokehouse with Willis's help, and Retta taught Wren to spin thread from flax. The cabin grew quieter but never lonely. One night, Retta stood at the edge of the field, belly just beginning to swell beneath her apron. Nalan came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "Boy or girl?" he asked. She smiled. "Doesn't matter, it'll be ours." He kissed the side of her neck. "I can't wait to meet them." The wind rustled the tall grass, whispering low across the earth. The stars blinked awake, and the cabin behind them glowed warm with lantern light. They stayed through every season, built a home from what they'd been given, raised 3 children in the shadow of the hills, taught them to plant, to mend, to love with full hearts and quiet strength. Retta never ran again. Nalan never drifted, and in the long years that followed, they never broke what they built. Not once.